He lost the house, lost the savings, lost the future he thought was set in stone. Friends whispered, "Man, she took everything." And maybe she did. But sitting alone in a half-empty apartment, mattress on the floor, coffee mug in the sink, he realized something no one else could see. Yes, he'd lost almost everything, but he'd gained something far more valuable, something no court could give, and nothing in this world could take away. The weight before the fall. Long before the divorce, he had already been losing pieces of himself, not all at once, but slowly, like water leaking from a cracked jar. A drop here, a drop there, until one day, he looked down and realized there wasn't much left inside. He used to wake up with energy, with ideas that pulled him out of bed before the alarm, with plans for the day that felt exciting, even in the small things, like making coffee just the way he liked it, or sitting on the porch to watch the sun climb over the horizon. But as the years went on, his mornings grew heavier, not because of age, but because every day had started to feel like another round of walking on eggshells. The laughter in their home, the kind that used to spill out without effort, had turned into small corrections, a comment about how he folded the laundry wrong, a sigh when he forgot something from the store, a tone that said more than the words themselves, the touches that once felt like affection, a hand on his shoulder, a quick kiss in the kitchen, now felt like an obligation, a mechanical habit, done more out of routine than desire. The conversations shifted too. Once, they talked about dreams, where they'd travel, what they'd build, how life would feel when they reached their goals. Now the talks were about demands, bills, schedules, responsibilities, things that kept the house running, but drained the air out of the room. He told himself this was just marriage, that maybe love changes over time, that maybe this was the natural trade, comfort instead of passion, stability instead of excitement. And when the tension grew, he didn't pull back. He pushed harder. He fixed more things, said yes to more requests, stayed up later to get one more task done. He told himself it was temporary, that if he just showed up enough, gave enough, proved himself enough, the warmth would come back. But in the quiet moments, when he was alone in the garage, or driving to work before the sun came up, he heard a voice he didn't want to listen to. It whispered, "This isn't home anymore." And deep down, he knew that voice was right. Because home isn't just walls and furniture. Home is the place where you can exhale. And he hadn't truly exhaled in years. The day everything collapsed. When it ended, it wasn't loud. No screaming across the room. No slammed doors that shook the walls. No dramatic scenes you might see in a movie. Just a quiet conversation in the kitchen. She was leaning against the counter, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, eyes fixed somewhere past his shoulder. And then she said it. The words that would echo in his head for years. "I'm not happy." 3 words. Soft, even gentle, but they landed like a hammer to the chest. He wanted to argue, to ask, when did this start? To list every sacrifice, every late night, every time he put her needs above his. But he didn't, because somewhere deep down, he already knew the answer. By the end of that week, half the closet was empty, drawers left half open, a hanger swinging by itself. By the end of that month, so was the bank account. Numbers on a screen that used to mean security, now just reminded him of what was gone. The house felt different, not just because her things were missing, but because her presence was. The scent of her perfume no longer lingered in the hallway. The faint sound of her voice on the phone, coming from another room, was gone. Even the things she left behind, a book on the nightstand, a sweater draped over a chair, felt like artifacts from another life. Friends tried to comfort him, said things like, "You'll bounce back. You're better off. She'll regret it one day." But their words couldn't touch the reality he was living in, that he was now walking through the wreckage of something he had spent years building. It wasn't just losing her. It was losing the version of himself that existed in that marriage. The man who believed that if you worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and stayed loyal long enough, you could make anything last. That man was gone. And what was left was someone standing in a half-empty kitchen, staring at the same counter where his marriage ended, wondering how you start over, when you don't even know who you are without her. The silence after the storm, the first night alone, was the hardest. No television murmuring from the living room, no clinking of dishes in the kitchen, no faint sound of her voice drifting in from another room. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing on your chest, daring you to make a sound. He sat on the edge of the bed, the one that now felt twice as big and twice as cold. Every object in the room seemed louder than it should be. The tick of the clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, even the sound of his own breathing. It's in that kind of silence that a man starts to hear things he's been avoiding for years. At first, the silence was unbearable because it echoed with everything he thought he'd done wrong. He replayed arguments, remembered moments where he could have listened better, spoken softer, been more patient. He thought about the promises he made at the beginning, and the ones he broke without even realizing it. But slowly, as the night stretched on, the silence became something else. It became space, room to breathe, room to think without interruption, without correction. And in that space, he started to notice something strange. He wasn't just mourning her absence. He was also feeling for the first time in years a kind of relief. Not joy, not happiness, but the quiet relief of no longer living in constant tension. He could walk into his own kitchen now, without bracing for a comment. He could sit in his chair without wondering if he was in someone else's way. And one night, sitting in that same silence, he realized something he had never dared to say out loud. I wasn't asking for too much. I was just asking the wrong person. It hit him like a truth that had been waiting for the right moment to surface. The silence after the storm wasn't empty. It was clearing, like the air after heavy rain. Still damp, still carrying the scent of what just happened, but open, wide. For the first time in a long time, he could hear his own thoughts, and they didn't scare him anymore. The distraction of bitterness. Bitterness was the easiest path. It was right there, waiting for him the moment she walked out the door. He could have taken it, could have replayed every slight, every time she dismissed his effort, every sacrifice that went unnoticed. He could have told himself, she wasted my years. She took the best of me. She left me with nothing. And maybe there was truth in some of those thoughts. But bitterness is a cage. It's dressed up to look like armor. Tough, impenetrable, safe. But inside, it's just pain pacing in circles. It feels powerful in the beginning. It makes you believe you're standing tall, that you're not letting anyone hurt you again. But the reality? Bitterness doesn't protect you. It just keeps you frozen in the moment you were hurt. And that was the trap he almost walked into. There were days when he'd scroll through old photos, just to remind himself how much had changed. Nights when he'd write out texts he'd never send, lines sharp enough to cut, designed to make her feel just a fraction of what he felt. But every time he got close to sending them, he stopped. Not because he forgave her yet, not because the pain was gone, but because he realized bitterness wasn't going to give him back a single thing he'd lost. It wouldn't return the years. It wouldn't rebuild the trust. It wouldn't bring back the man he used to be. And more than that, bitterness was distracting him from the one thing he actually needed: clarity. Bitterness says, she's the problem. Clarity asks, what part of me let this go on for so long? Bitterness says, I'll never let anyone get close again. Clarity says, I'll learn to choose better and protect myself. So he made a choice. Not an easy one, not a quick one, but a deliberate one. He chose to step out of the cage, to stop replaying the loss, and start asking what the loss could teach him. Because when a man stops feeding his bitterness, he starts feeding his future. And that shift, from anger to clarity, was the moment he truly began to heal. What divorce really took. On paper, the losses were easy to list. The house gone, the savings cut in half, the furniture, the car, the investments divided. If you looked at the court documents, you'd think that was the whole story. Numbers on a page, assets transferred from one column to another. But what divorce really took couldn't be itemized. It took the quiet confidence he once carried when he walked into his own home. It took the rhythm of his days, the small rituals that made life feel steady. Morning coffee brewed while she hummed in the kitchen, evening walks where they planned their future. It took the illusion of safety, the belief that home was a place where you could rest, let your guard down, and still be loved exactly as you were. And maybe most of all, it took the man he had been inside that marriage. That man, The one who put her needs ahead of his, without thinking twice. The one who stayed late at work to cover every bill. The one who skipped his own dreams, so hers could have room to grow, was gone. Not because he stopped caring, but because that version of him had been shaped by a belief that love meant self-erasure. And when the marriage ended, so did that belief. He didn't just lose possessions. He lost years of investment in a vision that no longer existed. He lost the trust that if you worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and stayed loyal long enough, it would guarantee a happy ending. And these losses, the ones that live in the chest, not the bank account, cut deeper than any financial wound, because money can be earned back. But innocence, that quiet faith in forever, once it's gone, it doesn't grow back the same way. He would never walk into a relationship again without remembering what it cost to lose one. And yet, in the space those losses left behind, something unexpected began to grow. Not instantly, not all at once, but slowly, like a seed that had been buried under years of compromise, finally given light and air. What divorce really took also created the room for what he was about to gain. And what he gained. The gains didn't arrive like a sudden sunrise. They came slowly, like light seeping into a dark room, through a small crack in the curtain. At first it was just little things. Waking up without the weight of an argument still hanging in the air. Making breakfast exactly how he liked it, and not worrying if anyone else approved. He gained mornings that were quiet for the right reasons. Not the suffocating silence of tension, but the peaceful quiet of a man in his own space. He gained freedom over his time, to take a walk at dusk without explaining where he was going, to stay out late with old friends, without checking his phone for a string of unanswered texts. He gained the joy of small indulgences, reading until 2 a.m., without feeling guilty, leaving tools spread out in the garage, because he'd get back to them tomorrow, and tomorrow belonged to him. Most of all, he gained himself, the version of him that existed long before the marriage, the man with hobbies that had nothing to do with anyone else, the man who laughed without watching for someone's reaction, the man who remembered that love, real love, isn't supposed to feel like survival. It wasn't that he stopped believing in relationships. It was that he stopped believing in losing yourself to keep one alive. He gained a deeper respect for his own boundaries, a sharper instinct for red flags, an understanding that peace is not the same as quiet, and that a home without arguments can still be a home without love. And there was another gain, one he hadn't expected. Clarity. Clarity about what he would no longer tolerate. Clarity about the kind of partner he could truly build with. Clarity about the difference between being needed and being valued. It was that clarity, more than freedom, more than time, more than peace, that became his greatest wealth. Because a man with clarity is far harder to trap, far harder to drain, and far more likely to build a life that stays standing, no matter who walks away, living with the compass of clarity. Clarity changes the way a man moves through the world. Before, he lived on autopilot, reacting to moods, responding to demands, adjusting himself to fit whatever the relationship required that day. Now, he lives by a compass he didn't have before, one that points to what's true, even when it's uncomfortable. He no longer asks, "What will keep the peace?" He asks, "What will keep me whole?" That one shift changes everything. It changes how he spends his time. No more overcommitting to people who drain him. No more shelving his own priorities, just to keep someone else happy. It changes how he loves. No more chasing approval. No more mistaking intensity for intimacy. No more settling for a connection that costs him his sense of self. It changes how he sees himself. He's not a man defined by what he can provide, or how much of himself he can give away. He's a man who knows his value, and refuses to negotiate it down. Clarity has made him slower to speak, but quicker to decide. It's made him less reactive to small storms, because he can see the bigger weather pattern now. And here's the thing about a man with a compass. He can walk away sooner, from jobs that crush his spirit, from friendships that only take, from relationships that mistake his loyalty for weakness. He's no longer afraid of being alone, because he's not truly alone anymore. He's with himself, fully. And when you're with yourself, you stop wandering. You stop grasping for someone else to complete you. You stop ignoring the quiet signs that something isn't right. Now, he builds a life by design, not by default. He knows where he's headed. He knows what matters. He knows what's worth keeping and what's worth letting go. And maybe that's the real gift of losing everything. Because when there's nothing left to cloud your vision, you finally see the road ahead. To the man sitting in an empty room tonight, staring at walls that used to be filled with voices, laughter, and the kind of noise you once called home, hear me. I know it feels like the world has stripped you bare, like everything you've built has been scattered to the wind. I know you replay it in your head, what you could have said, what you could have done, the moments where maybe, just maybe, you could have changed the ending. But here's the truth you can't see in the middle of the storm. You haven't lost everything. You've lost the things that could be taken from you. The house, the money, the plans you made with someone who's no longer here. But the core of who you are, that's still yours. And if you've been paying attention, you might even find that it's stronger now than it's ever been. Because loss has a strange way of clearing the ground, of tearing away the distractions, the compromises, the illusions, until all that's left is the solid, unshakable foundation of you. And from that place, you can rebuild, not the same life, not the same version of yourself, but something better. Something built on truth, on clarity, on the unshakable knowledge of what you will and will not allow, ever again. So don't rush to fill the silence. Don't scramble to replace what's gone, just to avoid feeling the emptiness. Sit in it, learn from it, let it teach you where you went blind, and where you finally learned to see. Because one day, you'll look back on this chapter, not with gratitude for the pain, but with respect for the man you became because of it. She may have left, the marriage may have ended, and yes, it may feel like you've lost it all. But if you've gained yourself, really gained yourself, you've already won more than you think. So stand up, breathe deep, and take that first step forward. Not back into what broke you, not into another version of the same trap, but into the life that's been waiting for you, ever since you found the courage to let the old one go.